It was just before 8 p.m. on a Palm Sunday in 2026. The world was supposed to be preparing for a sacred week. But in the Anguwan Rukuba district of Jos, a different kind of preparation was underway. On the darkened street of Angulu Ali, just 2 minutes from a university campus, two men were concluding their day's business. Saidu Murtala, a garden egg seller, was packing up his wares. His friend Hassan, known as the sugarcane boy, was locking up his store just nearby. They jokingly debated on the time they were supposed to leave for their home. Saidu suggested 7:30 p.m. for that day. Hassan asked that they stay until 9. Then around 7:46 p.m., just few minutes later, the world as they knew it shattered. Gunmen on motorcycles rode into the densely populated neighborhood, their engines roaring. Their guns opened fire indiscriminately. Saidu dove for cover, his mind scrambling in the chaos. In the frenzy, pandemonium broke out. Everyone was looking for somewhere, anywhere at all, to hide. A neighbor whose name Saidu would later say he will never, ever forget, threw open his door. The man was a Christian, Saidu was a Muslim. The neighbor did not ask any questions. He grabbed Saidu by the arm, pulled him into his house and locked the door behind him. He hid Saidu in his wife's room and brought him food and water. He called Saidu's father to let him know he was safe. When the shooting finally stopped and Saidu could finally come out, the garden egg seller had lost his friend Hassan, the sugarcane seller, and Hassan was nowhere to be found. Till date, his cell phone remains unreachable. He had disappeared into that dark night. By the time the sun rose on Palm Sunday 2026, at least 25 people lay dead in the streets of Anguwan Rukuba. Within days, President Bola Tinubu, in response to the growing pressure and the immense suffering, approved an immediate relief of 2 billion naira to support the victims of the March 29th attack. But for the people of Jos, relief money, while welcome, is an old ritual. 2 billion can buy food, it can buy blankets, but it cannot buy a 10-year-old's laughter. It cannot buy back the silence of a son. It can certainly not stop the circle where guns are already in the hands of the next set of killers just waiting for them on the hills. But not everyone died that night. Some survived by the thinnest of threads, by playing dead, by hiding under beds, by sheer impossible luck. Kyle Johnson was a printer from Gombe State, Nigeria, traveling through Jos. His vehicle was stopped at Bauchi Junction. The attackers demanded that Christians point out Christians. A fellow passenger pointed out Tayo. They dragged him out of the car, beat him up with cutlasses and stones until he had stopped moving. They then left him for dead, but Tayo was miraculously not dead. He laid motionless for over an hour, playing dead as the killers walked among the bodies of the victims. When the police finally arrived, he opened his eyes. He had survived. Michael Gomwok was a youth leader in Anguwan Rukuba, and he had survived by hiding. When the shooting began, he and his family scrambled under their beds. They listened as the attackers roamed outside, checking door by door, kicking down those doors, searching for victims. The footsteps came close to his door and then they passed. Michael and his entire family had lived through that night, hidden in plain sight. This is the story of a city that bleeds and bleeds and bleeds. A story not just of numbers, but of real people who were simply at the wrong place at the wrong time for decades. This is the shadow over Jos. Now, to really understand what had happened in Jos in March 2026, you don't just go back to that date. You have to start at the very, very beginning, because the ground in Jos is cursed with history. In the early 1900s, a precious metal was discovered deep within the highland place of Plateau State, that is tin. The British colonialists came to harvest this tin, and they brought with them a system of separation that would divide generations unborn. They drew a line between the indigenes and the settlers. The indigenes were the native Beron people, Afizere people, and the Anaguta people, and the settlers were migrant workers from other parts of northern Nigeria, and they were particularly the Hausa Fulani people. The indigenes were pushed to live in the surrounding hills, while the settlers occupied the fertile lowlands and the mining towns. When Nigeria finally gained independence in 1960, this colonial divide and rule system had already been here to stay. It was permanently enshrined in the very constitution, the very being of Plateau State. In Plateau State, if your ancestors were not from the hills, you were a settler. Nobody really cared if your grandparents were born or even died in the city. This label followed you wherever you went. It determined who got the government job, who got the scholarship, who could even own a land. It created a system of institutionalized second-class citizenship. Political scientist Adam Higazi called it civic apartheid. This tension between the settlers and the indigenes was just busy simmering for decades. But it was only a single administrative decision that finally lit the fuse in 2001. On September 7, 2001, the world was still 4 days away from the horrors of 9/11. But here in the high plains of Plateau State, Nigeria, hell had already arrived. The appointment of a Muslim official to coordinate a federal poverty reduction program in Jos North was seen by some as a fatal provocation. It triggered protests. Protests became fights. Fights became slaughter. JC Dan Yusuf was a boy that day. He was a little boy. He and his sister ran for 12 hours through a city that had turned into a war zone. They were separated from their parents and they kept running. His family took shelter at the Hill Station Hotel. From the restaurant, he had a direct line of sight into the neighborhood of Tudunwada. Jesse watched as people were killed, houses razed to the ground, buildings looted before his very eyes. 12 hours of not knowing if his parents were already amongst the bodies, being dragged into piles. He said, "The thing we saw that day, we can never ever unsee." When it was finally over, the official estimates speak of over 1,000 people dead. But if you walk through the old neighborhoods of Jos, an elder will tell you that the shadows of 2001 is forever carved into every corner. That week, neighbors killed neighbors, churches were burnt, mosques were razed. The cosmopolitan home of peace and tourism was gone forever. The first and deepest scar was cut. But sadly, the violence did not stop. It simply evolved. From city riots, the killings spread to the rural villages. It was no longer just clashes, it became a campaign. On the morning of March 7, 2010, at around 3 a.m. in the morning, the villagers of Dogo Nahawa were roused from their sleep, but not by a rooster, but by the sound of a heavy machine gun. A group of Fulani-speaking men had surrounded the community. Instead of rushing into the community, they used their machine guns to scare the residents like herds, like cattle, out of their homes and into the open fields where a line of attackers were waiting with machetes. One of the survivors from the Dogo Nahawa tragedy is a man we will call Pepe. Pepe was hiding in his home, listening to the screams that were happening next door. The killers moved systematically through houses, going house to house, shouting slurs called Arna, a derogatory term for a pagan or an infidel. Pepe could hear his neighbors crying for help, their prayers turning to shrieks and then to a gurgling silence. When he finally dared to leave his hiding spot and walk to his neighbor's house, he said, "I saw all the wives. They killed them, they cut their bodies, they put them on fire, particularly even the babies. They killed all the children, almost 4 children. They killed them with machetes and put fire on them." Among the victims was the community leader's 5-year-old granddaughter. Official counts speak of 109 people that were dead, but when the survivors of Dogo Nahawa, Zot and Rassat people gathered to bury their people that week, they filled a mass grave of over 100 bodies from just one village. The year 2010 is also when a father lost his 4-year-old son who was on the way to a Sunday school. He doesn't even know what happened or how it happened. All he knew was that he found his boy's body on the side of a hill. The bodies of children were just lying across the grass, burning. This is the shadow that has now stained an entire generation. For the next 13 years, the killing continued, ebbing and flowing, but its cold efficiency was perfected. On Christmas Eve of 2023, Pastor Gideon Dawa stepped out of his home briefly to buy some last-minute items for the celebration. By the time he returned, the world he knew had been incinerated. His pregnant wife and 5 children, in the space of half an hour, had been slaughtered in their home. He lost his family, his food, his belongings, all of them turned to ash. The state government came to see the damage. They packed the bones of his burnt children, as he said, into bags, but they never visited him, not even once. He was later invited to the government house chapel as a guest speaker, but the governor never asked him how he was living day to day, how he was surviving without his family. Around the same time as Pastor Dawa was busy fleeing from his church in Bar, a young mother named Mrs. Uren Matthew was huddled with her son in a nearby bush near the village of Chirang. She heard they were coming, so she ran for the stream, but the attackers were already there, waiting for her. She received a deep cut on her hand due to the chaos. Her son, her baby son, was also injured. In a moment of sheer survival instinct, she clutched him to herself and they both fell down to the ground, pretending to be dead. She held her son, feeling his heart pound against the cold earth. She held her breath as the man walked around the bodies, checking for survivors to kill them. Her son, a kid, a toddler, was quiet for a while, and then he made a tiny effort to crawl away. A shadow fell over him. They had noticed that he was not dead, that he was still alive, so they used a stone to hit him on the head till he died. The only thing that saved Mrs. Matthew that day was the fact that she was too terrified to speak. In January of 2026, just 2 months before the Palm Sunday attack, the Nigerian Senate released a report. The report stated that between 2001 and 2025, a span of just 24 years, over 11,749 people have been killed in Plateau State. Across 13 local government areas, 420 entire communities have been attacked and razed. More than 200,000 people have been displaced from their homes since 2001. But numbers as you know it are just cold. They don't cry, they don't scream for help as they are being dragged out of their cars. They are there, stagnant. Now let's return to 2026 to see how the story continues. Just 1 month after the March attacks, the guns came again. The guns erupted again. This time, the gunmen targeted the Imbrazongo community deep within the Kwara district of Bassa local government area of Plateau State, Nigeria. The attackers came not just with their guns, but they came with machetes and knives as well. They came during the midnight to attack their victims in their deepest of sleeps. Among the dead in this attack, according to a gut-wrenching list published by Daily Post Nigeria, was a group of 13 people, including 3 pregnant women, a nursing mother, and a 3-year-old toddler. The pregnant woman was found killed alongside her child, a child she never got to give birth to. A 3-year-old was found snuffed before he could even understand what the word country meant. On April 16, 2025, the governor of Plateau State, Governor Caleb Mutfwang, tried to contain what was happening in Plateau. He imposed a ban. No night grazing, no transportation of cattle after 7 p.m., no motorcycles on the streets between 7 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning. It was a desperate attempt to limit the mobility of the raiders who struck in the cover of the night. The attackers just simply adapted. They always do. In January 2026, even after the Senate was busy tabulating its grim census of the dead, the federal government's initial response was to call for dialogue. They asked the community leaders to sit down with leaders of the Fulani community to solve the issue of land and grazing. By April, after the Palm Sunday attack had already killed nearly 30 people, including the University of Jos students, the offer of dialogue seemed to have completely run out. President Tinubu, in a tense meeting with state stakeholders, finally ordered the security agencies to fully go after the gunmen. He approved the 2 billion naira relief. He stated, "This must stop. This must really stop." In the wake of the March 29 attack, the Department of the State Security (DSS) moved really swiftly. Between April 3rd and April 10, 2026, they arrested 5 men. Isa Umar Ibrahim, Awalu Abubakar, also known as Awalu Dogo, Musa Abubakar Ibrahim, also known as Yaroro, and Adamu Isa Al-Hassan, and one more named Ado Ibrahim still remains at large. The government filed terrorism charges against them. Adamu Isa Al-Hassan faces the most serious of counts: culpable homicide, illegal possession of firearms, and unlawful dealing with arms and ammunition. These offences carried the possibility of death by hanging if there is a successful conviction. For the families of the 25 victims of the Anguwan Rukuba attack, this is just a very, very small comfort. The suspects are in court, yes, but the question still remains: will this be another trial that fades into an endless backlog of Nigerian justice, or will this be the first crack in the circle of impunity? Only time will really tell. Saidu Mutala, the garden egg seller who was saved by the Christian man, is still looking for his lost friend Hassan, the sugarcane seller. Pastor Gideon Dawa still has a bag containing the burnt bones of his 5 children and his pregnant wife. The mother who held her son as he was stoned to death is still living in the camp, still wondering what happened and how everything just went wrong. On the hill somewhere outside Jos, a boy's body, a 4-year-old who was just going to Sunday school one fateful day, his body is buried in a shallow grave. That boy never really knew the difference between a settler and an indigent. He was an innocent boy, and his death, more than the numbers and the dates, is a shadow that refuses to leave. The history is a circle, a bloody spinning loop of death and destruction. This is shadows of the past, remembering those the world have forgotten.